Last week we did a Tamin Halacha shir on Birchas HaShachar after staying up all night, and what else did we discuss? We discussed Birchas HaShachar and Netilas Yadayim, right? So we said we still want to discuss Birchas HaTorah after a person stays up all night. So what do we do about Birchas HaTorah? If you've been up all night, you haven't slept, does the person have to say Birchas HaTorah? So there is a Machlokas Rishonim, it's 2 days, according to the Shulchan Aruch and Sim Mem Zayin, Sif Yud Aleph. If a person sleeps a shenas keva, a person takes a long nap in the afternoon, does he have to make a new Birchas HaTorah when he wakes up from his nap? That's a machlokas between the Rosh and Rabbeinu Tam. According to Rabbeinu Tam, a person has to make a Birchas HaTorah every day in the morning. It's like Birchas HaShachar, and it's not tali and hefsek res chadas, and therefore, if he takes a nap during the day, he would not have to make a new Birchas HaTorah. Whereas according to the Rosh, a person is chayiv when he takes a shenas keva, takes a long nap during the afternoon. That's a hesek hadas, it's a hefsek, and he does need to say a new Birchas HaTorah when he wakes up from the nap. So that's really the opposite case of our case, right? Our case is where you didn't have the hefsek and hesek hadas, but you do have the new morning. So the pashtus is l'chaora, someone who's up all night. It's totally in that same machlokas though, that according to the Rosh, you would not make a new bracha because there was no hefsek and hesek hadas. According to Rabbeinu Tam, you would make a new bracha because you were up all night, and it's a new day, and Birchas HaShachar is a chiyuv that comes each and every day, so you would have to make a new bracha. So what do we do about this situation? The fact that we have a suffix, we're not sure what the halacha is. So Shulchan Aruch happens to say by the naps, Shulchan Aruch quotes both deos, but the Shulchan Aruch says, let me get it inside. Shulchan Aruch says, Sim Mem Zayin, Sif Yud Aleph. It's a very interesting lashon. This is why I want to look at it inside. Normally, when you're sensitive to the klalim of the Shulchan Aruch will quote some things as a stam and some things as a yesh omrim. When he says something stam and then he quotes a yesh omrim, he almost always is paskening like the stam, right? So Shulchan Aruch says in this context, shnas keva bayom al mitaso have a hefsik, that taking a nap during the day, that is a hefsik, meaning that's the rush. The yesh omrim delo have a hefsik, and some say it's not a hefsik. That's Rabbeinu Tam, right? But then he adds 2 words, v'chei nagu, and our minig is that it's not considered a hefsek, and that we don't say Birchas HaTorah when we take a long nap. Right? When was the last time you took a long nap Shabbos afternoon and you wanted to go to a shir between Mincha and Mariv? You don't take you don't make a new Birchas HaTorah because v'chei nagu, that we paskin like the Rabbeinu Tam that it's not a hefsek. Now, if that's true, v'chei nagu, that we paskin like the Rabbeinu Tam, so on the flip side, when we wake up when we stay up all night and comes the new morning, we should definitely have to make a new Birchas HaTorah, right? It should turn out that we should make a new Birchas HaTorah. However, the Magen Avram points out that from the Mechaber, in one Seif later, in Seif Yud Beis, it sounds that the Mechaber holds the opposite. It sounds from the Mechaber that when you're up all night, you do not make a new Birchas HaTorah in the morning. He says, Afim lamed v'layla, layla holich achar yom sha'avar, ve'enu tzarech levarich kol zman shelo yashen. But you don't have to make a new bracha as long as you haven't slept. Sounds like when you're up all night, you don't make a new bracha because you haven't slept, and only when you sleep you make a new bracha. So Magen Avram wonders, how could the Mechaber in one sif say that v'chei nagu, that we have like Rabbeinu Tam, and then in the next sif say otherwise? So Riki Vega points out that in Sif Yud Aleph, he's not paskening like Rabbeinu Tam. He's saying v'chei nahagu, which means to say that really Meikra Din we pasken like the Rosh. Really, the halacha should be that when you wake up, when you're up all night, you should not require a new Birchas HaTorah, and if you take a nap during the day, you should require a new Birchas HaTorah. But v'chei nagu, like Rabbeinu Tam, in the case of taking a nap in the afternoon, because of a suffix brachos, we want to be makel on a suffix brachos, not to require you to say a new bracha, which that alone is quite a chiddush. Because of a suffix brachos, we're going to be makel on a bracha of Birchas HaTorah. Birchas HaTorah is chiv d'oraisa. Suffix brachos lahakel we generally assume by chiv d'rabanan, but in a chiv d'oraisa, it seems that the Mishnah Berurah is so himself. What we do about a suffix Birchas HaTorah in Sifkat and Gimel and Sim Mem Zayin, Mishnah Berurah says Birchas HaTorah is min Torah, and therefore, if you're not sure if you made Birchas HaTorah or not, you don't know if you said it yet already, say it again, because suffix d'oraisa l'chumra. But then in Sifkat and Chavches, in that same siman, the Mishnah Berurah says if you've been up all night, since it's a machlokas haposkim whether you have to say Birchas HaTorah or not, savik brachas lahakel, so don't say Birchas HaTorah. What do you mean? He's the same guy that just said that it's that since it's Daraisa, we're always going to be Machmir Birchas HaTorah. Very, very difficult to understand that Mishnah Berurah, what the Mishnah Berurah's opinion is. Rav Asher, my first thought was that maybe there's a difference between a suffix whether you did the mitzvah or a suffix whether you are chayiv in the mitzvah. Meaning in the case where a person, that in Sifkat and Gimel Mishnah Berurah says, you don't know if you did it yet or not, but you know that you were chayiv. You woke up in the morning, a new day, you're definitely chayiv. You just don't know if you said it or not. So that's where we're going to say suffix daraisa l'chumra. But if you don't even know that there's a chiyuv to begin with, then maybe we'll say suffix brachos lahaka. Rav Asher suggests that amongst a couple of other suggestions of what the Mishnah Berurah might be trying to tell us, or he says maybe the Mishnah Berurah's base is really based on what he writes in Sivkat and Chafei, that really Meikar Adin, a person does have to make a new bracha after he takes a long afternoon nap, according to the Mishnah Berurah. So if that's the case, then you wouldn't make a bracha when you're up all night. So what are the eitzos? What do we do? The way it turns out, it's a machlokas, right? It turns out it's machlokas Rabbeinu Tam and the Rush, and we don't have a very clear picture of who we hold like. Do we hold like Rabbeinu Tam that you should make a new bracha because it's a new morning, or do we hold like the Rush you should not make a new bracha? So one eitzah is Rabbi Kiva Eiger. Rabbi Kiva Eiger suggests in his chidushim to the Shulchan Aruch that if you take a nap on Erev Yantif, if you're lucky enough to be able to take a nap on Erev Yantif, so then Vadai, by the next morning, you have to make a new bracha, because according to the Rush, you had your hefsek in Nesach Hadas by sleeping in the afternoon, and according to Rabbeinu Tam, you have a new day by the next morning, so Vadai, by the next morning, you'd have to make a bracha. In the end of Sefer Isha Yisrael, they quote from Chaim Kanievsky. Chaim Kanievsky has these Chuvos Ktsaros, where he says that the Chazon Ish didn't like this eitz of Rabbi Kiva Eiger. He said no, because the reason the Chazon Ish didn't like it is that any daytime nap is not a shenas keva. That by definition, a daytime nap is not called shenas keva. Very difficult to understand what that means. Why would that be the case? A person sleeps. How about that sleep that you have after staying up all night Shavuos, right? Where you go till 3 o'clock or so. So that's not a shenas keva. You're sleeping more than you ever slept the whole rest of the year. So that's very difficult to understand what that means. Pashtus says Rabbi Kiva Eiger has a very good eitzah if you're lucky enough to be able to take a nap on Erev Yantif in the afternoon. What if you're not lucky enough to take a nap? Is there any other eitzah? So someone sent me an email this morning. Moshe Smith sent me an email that some daily halacha where they quoted from the Luach Eretz Yisrael and from the Sefer Piskei Tshuvos an eitzah that maybe if you have kavana on Erev Shavuos in the morning, that you want your Birchas HaTorah to be mugbal. You want your Birchas HaTorah to only run until the next morning. So you're having you're having kavana that your Birchas HaTorah shouldn't cover past the next morning. So maybe that would be a good eitzah, and then for sure would run out by the next morning, you'd be able to make a Birchas HaTorah by yourself. Now that l'chora is not so pashut. Do you have the power to limit the koach of your bracha and to say that your bracha should only go until X amount of time? There is a tshuva Mechzel Avram in Siman Lamed Daled. Rav Asher Weiss quotes it in his Minchas Asher on Talmud Torah in Siman Ches. So the tshuva is Mechzel Avram. He's done. What if you have an old Sefer Torah that your masupik might be puzzle? You're not sure if the Sefer Torah is kosher or puzzle, and you're afraid if you get an aliyah, you don't know if you want to make a bracha on it. So he suggests maybe a person can make a bracha in his sharbach rabbanon that he makes in the morning, and have in mind that when he's making that bracha, that if he's called for an aliyah to the Sefer Torah, that this bracha in the morning should only cover him until the moment that he's called to the Sefer Torah, and then he should need to make a new sharbach rabbanon just to be able to learn Torah the rest of the day. So he quotes from the Magen Avram in Siman Taf Reish Lamed Tes in Hilchos Sukkah, where the Magen Avram quotes, disagrees with the Bach, who says that when you eat again in the Sukkah, you make a new bracha leishiv b'Sukkah, because, says the Bach, mistama your das was only to be yotzei for that moment. And the Magen Avram was, what do you mean mistama your das was only to be yotzei for that moment? When you make a bracha, you don't control, says the Magen Avram, what your bracha covers. Your bracha covers it as long as you're in the Sukkah. And if you eat again in the Sukkah, you're there all day. So you don't make another bracha. Your bracha covers all of that. So what does it turn out? That according to the Magen Avram, you don't have that kind of control. You cannot control what your bracha covers. The Chacham Tzvi on the other end, in the Tshuva and Simon Chav Beis, when he talks about Chazan and making a Birchas HaTorah before Slichos, and then making another Birchas HaTorah in the morning, he says, yeah, that's fine, because they have in mind the Birchas HaTorah before Slichos, that it's only covering the Psukim that they're reading in the Slichos, and not what the learning they're going to do later. So Chacham Tzvi seems to assume that you do have the ability to be magbil, you do have the ability to limit what your bracha goes on. This also may be totally in the Machlokas Pri Chadosh and Tvor Shar in Hilchos Shchita. The halacha halacha is a shochet. When he makes the bracha, he's not supposed to talk. Let's say this guy's going to shecht 1,000 chickens one morning. So he's not supposed to talk between one shechita and the next because he made one bracha and it's supposed to go on everything. What if, and it's a suffix, if he does talk, whether he has to make another bracha. So Pri Chadash says, here's a good eitzah to get you out of any situation of suffix. Have kavana, beferish, when you make your first bracha on shechita, that bracha should only cover you until you talk. And therefore, when you talk, you vaday are going to need a new bracha. That's the eitzah of the Pri Chadash. Tvua Shar says, no, a guy has a lot of fruits in front of him. He has the ability to say, I only want my bar priyates to be on the apple, not on the orange, and then make another bar priyates on the orange. You can't do that. So again, it seems like the same machlokas. Can you be magbil? Can you limit what your bracha is going to be chal on? So this is it's at least a machlokas aposkim which calls this eitzah into question. So what's the eitzah yu'utza? What do we always do? Person stays up at night all night, and you have the suffix about Birchas HaTorah in the morning. So what do we always do? We have someone else say the Birchas HaTorah for us. Someone who slept will say the Birchas HaTorah for us, will be motzi us in our Birchas HaTorah. That works l'kulei alma, I think, right? There was no reason to question why that would work. But here's the problem. Here's the issue that I just saw this year. I never thought about it. Amud HaShachar, typically, on Shavuos morning this year, Amud HaShachar is at 4:09. Right? When does the Shavuos learning program in most shuls end? About 5 o'clock. Because we try to work it out that the tefillah will be with nates. Right? We're on Daven Vasikin. The chiyuv for Birchas HaShachar, the new day, that's the mechayiv of new Birchas HaShachar, comes at Alos HaShachar at 4:09. So what happens? You're in a shul and someone's saying a shir. So and you're middle of learning. You're middle of learning b'chavrusa, and it comes time for Alos HaShachar. You still have another hour of learning ahead of you. How are you allowed to learn? You shouldn't be allowed to learn. It should be usher to continue learning without a new Birchas HaTorah. So what do? So good. So at that point, we should find somebody, get everybody back together in the main shul and say, New Birchas HaTorah. Have you ever in your life seen that done? First of all, you're not going to find somebody. So the guy who's sleeping, who's going to come back, is sleeping at that time. That's why he's going to. Right? He took one for the team. He decided to go to sleep, so that but he's not there. He's not awake at that time. So should we have to close the books and stop learning? Is there any heter to continue learning? So there is a discussion. Is it mamish asur to learn without Birchas HaTorah? Shlomo Zalman associates himself a couple places in Mincha Shlomo, but he writes in one place that maybe that it's like a Birchas HaNenin, that just like it's asur to eat an apple without making bar priyates, it's asur to learn Torah. It's not just stam a bittul mitzvah of Birchas. It's asur to learn Torah without a Birchas HaTorah. But maybe there are a couple of sniffim we could add lahakal over here. First of all, Maker Adin, maybe we really pass like the Rush. Keep in mind, Shulchan Aruch quoted the Rush stam, right? And then the Rabbeinu Tam is a yesh omrim. And then he said v'chei nagu, but the way we analyzed it before is that maybe the Shulchan Aruch is really sticking to the Rush. Rabbi Akiva Eiger said maybe that's the real halacha. Really, we pass on like the Rush. If we really pass on like the Rush, that would mean that as long as he didn't have Hesach Hadas, there's no chiyuv of Birchas HaTorah. So maybe really Mikradin, we pass on like the Rush. So and a second possibility, second snif lahakel, I saw in the Sefer Kovetz Halachos on Hilchos Firas HaOmer. So he suggests that maybe when it's efshar, maybe there's no chiyuv of Birchas HaTorah when it's impossible to make a Birchas HaTorah. Over here you're not allowed to, because it's going to be a Safek Bracha Levatala, assuming that even though I'm in Safek Birchas HaTorah, we would go lahakel. So you can't go ahead and make another bracha. It's efshar. You have no choice. Maybe in that situation there is no din of Birchas HaTorah. Where does he get this idea? So he says he has a raya from a Gemara in Brachos Tav Chaf and Beis. The Gemara says that it's asur for a Bal Keri to be osik in Torah and to be kari Kriya Shema and to make a bracha. Avul b'shas Kriya Shema yaharer Kriya Shema. But when it comes time for Kriya Shema, you should have hirur. You should think about Kriya Shema. So there is a machlokes. There is a machlokes between the Gra and the Mechaber. Does one have to make a Birchas HaTorah when he's going to be thinking and learning? So the Gra holds that you have to make a Birchas HaTorah even when you're going to be thinking and learning. So what's the eitzah of the Gemara according to the Gra? You should be Maharher Kriya Shema. Kriya Shema is full, the whole thing is psukim, right? So how could you be Maharher Kriya Shema? How does that help? You're not able to say the Birchas HaTorah. How are you going to be allowed to be Maharher Kriya Shema? Elamai, what do you see? It must be that the way the Gra understands the Gemara is that when it's Efshar, you're Balkari, you're unable to make the bracha. It must be that it's mutter to learn Torah without the brachas. So who adin us? If we're learning and it's impossible for us to say a bracha, maybe it's mutter. So that was his raya. He said he found later that Rav Elyashiv brings us raya in Kovitz Shuvas Chelik Aleph Siman, but he asked Rav Shmuel Kamenetsky, and Rav Shmuel Kamenetsky was not such a big fan of this raya. Another eitzah, if someone wants to be choshish for this and he's learning, is to learn behirhur. Meaning, if you pass the Mikra Adin like the Mechaber, that we don't have to say Birchas HaTorah and Hirhur. What's the Graz Hal Raya that we say Birchas HaTorah and Hirhur? Because we say Birchas HaTorah on writing, that when you're Kosev Divrei Torah, you have to say Birchas HaTorah. So there's a simple chiluk that all the Achronim point out. Writing is a Maisa. Hirhur is not a Maisa at all. So it could be that you pass like the Mechaber, Shulchan Aruch Mem Zayin Siv Gimel, that Kosev Divrei Torah, Avol B'Sheino Korei Tzarich Levarech, but nevertheless, when you're Maharer Divrei Torah, Shulchan Aruch says in Siv Dalid, Ein Tzarich Levarech. So you could just be Maharer Divrei Torah. That would work for anybody who's learning by himself. And you're just reading, so that's Mahar Divrei Torah. But a person who's learning B'chavrusa, we're saying a shir, so that's not going to work. So I think the minig is that we're making based on probably the rush, and based on maybe you could add in that extra sniff that it's efshar to say the brachos, but maybe if you have someone there who did sleep, that would be a great time to get that person to say the Birchas HaTorah, to do it dafka then at a Marashachar. I said we were going to talk about talis. There's not that much to talk about. The bracha on the talis you just make for someone who doesn't wear a talis, wears talis katan, and therefore doesn't put it on again. So you make the bracha for him so that he could be yotzi the bracha in the morning, and then he just moves around the talis katan. But anyone who's putting on a talis gadol, vaday has to make a new bracha on the talis gadol. Not everyone has to listen to one person's bracha on the talis gadol. Yeah.
Just let's say a person falls asleep and takes like a base nap, right? He puts his head down and falls asleep for a half hour.